This all unfolded over a few chilling weeks, pushing me further away from the late-night grind, especially after last night. I thought it was over, that I could breathe easy again, but last night had other plans for me, ... As a software developer, deadlines are my iron chains. When they loom, they demand sacrifice. I either stay late to meet them or face the wrath of my boss. With several milestones looming, I found myself tethered to my desk late into the night more times than I could count. My wife was understandably irate. With 3 young kids under 6, they were a whirlwind of chaos, and she desperately needed a break when I staggered home. But deadlines are unyielding, relentless. Strangely, I found a dark solace in the quiet office after hours. The lights dimmed automatically, leaving only the eerie glow of my computer screen as my solitary companion. I could sink into my background music and drift away from the demands of the world. On the first night of this project, I was lost in the hard riffs of a CDC when I heard it, the soft sound of something prowling the cubicle farm around. 6 p.m. Perhaps some stragglers had lingered. I silenced my music and stood up, straining to see who was there. It was the cleaning lady, pushing a bulky garbage bin down the aisle, emptying the waste from each cubicle. We exchanged polite smiles as she passed, her eyes flickering with a ghostly recognition. I settled back into my routine, opting for headphones to drown out the creeping sensation that I was being watched. As she approached my cubicle, I offered another smile, but she ignored me, mechanically dumping my trash and moving on. I shrugged it off. She wasn't hired for friendliness, and it wasn't my concern. An hour ticked by, and I was finally making some headway on my tasks. I decided to stretch, lifting my arms in a yawn, and that's when it happened. My fingers brushed against something soft like wisps of hair or eerie, dangling strings. I froze, my heart racing, and looked up. Nothing. The ceiling loomed a mere 6 feet above, utterly empty. Startled, I sank back into my chair, the paranoia creeping in like shadows in the dark. I shoved one headphone back in, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling, but soon enough, I heard it again. The rhythmic shuffle of footsteps on the short carpet, the sound a haunting echo of someone gliding through the desolate cubicles. I pulled out my headphone and stood up, scanning the ghostly rows of empty desks. Silence. The footsteps had vanished, leaving only the oppressive quiet. I swallowed hard, a shiver running down my spine, and decided enough was enough for the night. I saved my work, uploaded my files to the staging server, and began packing my bag. As I moved toward the exit, I glanced back over the cubicles. They were dark, lifeless, no flicker of light anywhere. A wave of relief washed over me as I stepped downstairs and into the parking lot. The warm summer air a stark contrast to the chill in the office. The next day, I shared my unsettling experience with my coworkers, expecting a mix of concern and laughter. Instead, I received chuckles and playful jabs. The workday droned on, but my mind was preoccupied by my wife's ire over my late nights. I won't delve into the details, but she was far from pleased. In an attempt to ease the tension, I agreed to bring my computer home, thinking the ordeal was behind me. But it wasn't. That night, I found myself cursing and swearing at my screen, battling to access the server. I'd never worked from home before, and the VPN was a relentless foe. No matter what I tried, full access slipped through my fingers like smoke, leaving me trapped in a digital nightmare. I didn't write a single line of code that night, and when I told my wife I might have to stay late again if I couldn't fix the issues by morning, she apologized and we patched up the remnants of our earlier fight. After hours of fruitless effort, I finally reached the IT department around 5 p.m., just as they were about to clock out. Their voice crackled through the line, laced with the usual corporate indifference. "I'm sorry, but we don't allow direct uploads or downloads to the server from VPN connections. It's a safety feature. We can enable this for your account, but only one day at a time." I felt a creeping frustration rise within me. I understood their paranoia, but it felt excessive. "Can you enable it for my account so I can work from home tonight?" I pleaded. "Sorry, I'm about to leave and I don't have time to set that up. Submit a ticket and I'll handle it tomorrow." Grumbling, I submitted the ticket. It was already past 5 o'clock, and rather than disturb my frazzled thoughts, I decided to stay for a few more hours. My wife was already expecting me home. I could have downloaded the necessary files to work from home, but I was on a roll. When I told my wife I was staying, I plunged back into my work. Around 6, the cleaning lady arrived. I offered her a polite smile, but she just moved past me, absorbed in her tasks. Shrugging it off, I cranked up my music, letting the sound envelop me. A few songs in, a heavy thump echoed from down the hall, a distant yet jarring noise, like someone had dropped a chair. It was just a dull thud, devoid of any metallic clang. Confused, I turned down my music and stood up to peer into the darkness. From my vantage point, the hallway beyond was a black void, the lights casting eerie shadows that seemed to claw their way into my workspace. A chill gripped me as memories of last night resurfaced. I sat back down, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end, and let the quiet music play softly, just enough to mask the unsettling shuffling from the hallway. It returned, the faint sound of footsteps dragging along the carpet, moving closer. I slapped my hand over the mute button, but the shuffling persisted, slowly advancing toward my cubicle, cloaked in darkness. Each step was deliberate, as if the figure were savoring my growing dread. My heart raced, and a cold sweat broke out on my palms as I strained to see through the inky blackness. I couldn't make out a single shape or form, just the sound, dragging and dragging, slow as molasses. My breath hitched in my throat, suspended in an uneasy silence. Then, one final footfall and everything fell quiet. A shiver raced down my spine. The silence hung in the air, thick and suffocating. It gnawed at my nerves more than the footsteps ever had. The ringing in my ears crescendoed, amplifying my anxiety. If it were moving, I couldn't hear it above that relentless noise. I stared into the darkness, a creeping dread coursing through me. I wondered if whatever was lurking could see me, if it was staring right back. What thoughts slithered through its mind? It was not a he or she, it was an it, a nameless entity. And that realization sent a jolt of fear through me, ... My resolve wavered as my mind played tricks. I swore I saw something shift in the dark, and the pitch of the silence gnawed at me like a hungry beast. Desperate to reclaim a semblance of control, I cranked up the volume on my music, drowning out the terror that loomed just beyond my sight, hoping the noise would shield me from the growing sense of dread. With a shaky confidence, I took one step backward, then another, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. I groped blindly for the volume control, my fingers trembling as I realized I wasn't close enough to my keyboard. In a panic, I jerked my head around, and just as I hit the unmute button, something darted out of the corner of my eye. My gaze snapped back to the hallway, catching a glimpse of something slink away into the shadows, down a side corridor leading left. The office was arranged like a sinister ladder, with workstations strung out on either side, dark hallways connecting them like veins in a dying creature. What had just fled into that dark passageway was no longer a mere figment of my imagination. It had taken the form of a grotesque specter. What sent shivers coursing down my spine was the long trail of hair streaming behind whatever it was, a tangled mass that should have belonged to a person, yet somehow felt wrong. My mind recoiled at the thought of this thing being human. As it vanished into the gloom, I stumbled, my limbs refusing to obey me, paralyzed by fear. It was only around 6:30 p.m., but the urge to escape the suffocating office became overwhelming. I shut my laptop with a decisive snap, packed it hastily, and made my way toward the stairs. Just as I reached the top stair on my side of the stairwell, I glanced up and felt a visceral lurch in my throat. The door to the other work area was ajar, and there it stood, something lurking just beyond the frame. I could see a few errant locks of hair dangling just inside, swaying as if caught in an unseen breeze. It was pressed against the wall, close enough for its hair to spill out like some nightmarish invitation. That was all it took. I bolted, taking the stairs 2 or 3 at a time, my breath hitching in my chest until I burst through the door into the parking lot. I didn't feel the thrill of a chase, yet I ran as if pursued by demons, racing toward my car. I flung the door open, tossed my bag into the passenger seat, and peeled away into the night, the darkness swallowing me whole. A dark curiosity gnawed at me, urging me to glance back at the office, but I resisted, the dread coiling tighter in my gut. My heart didn't find its rhythm until I arrived home, where I concealed the truth of what I had witnessed, dismissing my anxiety as mere stress over deadlines. My wife accepted my facade, gently encouraging me to rest early, believing my lies and allowing me to escape into a fragile sleep. The next day dawned with sunlight pouring in, a deceptive warmth that coaxed calmness from the chaos of the previous night. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to step back into the world of the living, heading to work as if nothing had happened. I kept the horrors of last night to myself, my coworkers too absorbed in their tasks to recall my tale of terror. They were laser-focused on the project, and I spun a web of technical issues to explain why I hadn't completed my section as promised. I assured the project manager that I'd be on track, determined not to repeat the mistakes of the past. That evening, I had no intention of staying late again. Despite the unresolved access issues typical of my company, I downloaded every file I might need before the day ended. I refused to let the shadows of the office claim me once more. No way in hell would I stay late again, no matter how relaxed I felt now. The fear had dulled after a night's sleep, but I was not eager to tempt fate. I got caught up, barely managing to drown out the distractions from the night before. The shadows of that unsettling evening loomed over me, leaving me far behind in my work. Still, I managed to complete everything I had been assigned, relief flooding over me as I anticipated going to bed at a reasonable hour with my wife. I could sense the strain my late nights were putting on her, but to her credit, she remained silent, as if waiting for the storm to pass. It wasn't as if I could help it. The product version launched, and I found myself working from home each time I was needed. Eventually, they fixed my access issues, but I discovered it was far simpler to just download what I needed rather than request access every single day. Each morning, I would come in and upload my changes without incident, the nightmare nearly forgotten, until corporate stepped in. The corporate beast, with its insatiable hunger, reared its ugly head, threatening to ruin everything we held dear. "We want your team to love each other," they declared, imposing a new regime. For the upcoming product version launch, we were to stay 2 hours late every week for unpaid overtime. The company would order pizzas on their tab, and we were expected to collaborate, to get ahead of the workload together. It quickly became apparent I wasn't the only one who had fallen behind. Yet instead of granting us more time, they demanded our presence after hours. The atmosphere turned sour. Nobody wanted to stay late, but corporate gets what corporate wants. The first week was a miserable affair, the team dragging themselves through the motions, their spirits crushed under the weight of mandatory overtime. The managers prattled on about increased teamwork and improved morale, oblivious to the resentment festering beneath the surface. Each week dragged on, and people devised ways to dodge the extra hours. Designers, content writers, graphic artists, they all found a way to get ahead, leaving the coders to shoulder the burden of extra work. We were left with a mountain of tasks that loomed over us like a specter, one we couldn't even begin to tackle until the other teams finished theirs. And so it was, against my will, that I found myself stuck in the office once more. When the time came to go home, my manager delivered the ultimatum. I was in charge of the code reviews that week, and they had to be completed that very night. While others left, I was shackled to my desk, reviewing the work of 3 team members who had worked tirelessly all day, eager to escape. Frustration bubbled within me. All I wanted was to get through it as quickly as possible. I had nearly forgotten the terrors of the past, consumed by anger. I pushed my headphones in tighter, immersing myself in the lines of code. But then, something strange began to happen. Every so often, an insistent dinging sound pierced through my music, as if a ghostly reminder lurked in the background. I removed my headphones, shook them, even scraped out earwax in a futile effort to silence the noise, but nothing worked. With a growl of annoyance, I yanked them from the jack and tossed them into the next cubicle, letting the song spill out into the air. Yet, just a minute later, the ding echoed again, faint yet unmistakably there. I closed my eyes in irritation, convinced it was some alert or notification echoing from my computer. I hit pause on YouTube, plunging myself into silence, waiting for the intruding sound to reveal itself. As I took a sip of my drink, it came again soft, but somehow louder than my own thoughts, weaving through the fabric of silence. This sound wasn't coming from my computer. It had to be something else, something lurking just beyond the veil of reality, tapping on the boundaries of my perception. I felt an icy tendril of dread creep up my spine, a chill that told me the darkness was still very much alive, watching, waiting. And it wasn't finished with me yet. The sound was creeping in from down the hall, the ding of the elevator arriving at my floor. A single workspace stood between me and the elevators, muting the noise until it reached me, but the high pitch cut through my music like a knife. I wished I'd turned the volume up louder. The memories of the previous weeks rushed back like a chilling tide. I couldn't help but turn my head to glance at the dark hallway leading to the elevators. Whatever I had encountered last time was back. I strained to hear shuffling footsteps, but only silence answered me. To drown out the awful ringing in my ears, I made noise on purpose, clattering my fingers against the keys. The elevator had arrived again, and I took a deep breath. The weight of unfinished work loomed over me. I would be in deep trouble if I returned the next day without completing my tasks. I had two options: stay and finish, or download the files and take them home. I opted for the latter. Sitting down, I began the tedious process of downloading the files. There were over 50 individual snippets of code to review, and our ridiculous software only allowed me to select and download one file at a time. I had to manually click each file, a monotonous task that suddenly struck me as absurd. Here I was, haunted by an unseen presence, yet I still fretted over the looming lecture from my boss. I actually laughed at the irony, the sound echoing eerily in the stillness. But then, the giggles faded into the background, replaced by that now familiar shuffling. My throat constricted, and the humor evaporated like mist. The elevator dings had ceased, leaving only the frantic sound of my mouse clicks. Come on, I muttered, my hand shaking as I clicked the second-to-last file. Just then, a noise made me jump, and I slammed my palms against the keyboard. The heavy security door of the stairwell to my left creaked open, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Someone was coming in from the parking lot. I clicked the last file and hit download. The shuffling halted, probably scared off by the newcomer. I stuffed my laptop into my bag, hoisting it over my shoulder as I briskly walked toward the stairwell. Then it happened. I rounded the corner and gasped, slipping back to crash onto the tiled floor, my legs dangling over the first two steps. There, just a few feet down, something loomed in the shadows, staring at me. My vision twisted and warped, as if it existed in multiple places at once, its form a grotesque jumble of twitching limbs in shapeless darkness. Panic seized me as I grabbed the door handle to the stairwell, my palms slick with sweat. I barely glimpsed the horror before instinct kicked in, and I sprinted away, my bag bouncing against my back. If it was behind me, I needed to move fast. As I sprinted through the blackened hallway to the next workspace, it felt like the darkness itself was swallowing me whole, only to spit me out on the other side. I dared a glance back, a mistake I would soon regret. Just as I turned, I caught sight of it ducking back into the ceiling, a gap where a tile should have been allowed it to lean out, its twisted shape peering down at me, watching my every move. My mind barely processed this. All I knew was that it was still pursuing me. I rushed through the heavy fire door, separating the work area from the main staircase, my heart pounding like a drum. I planned to take the big staircase down and escape through the main entrance when I rounded the corner and skidded to a halt. To my right lay the stairs, but to my left, the elevator doors were closing. But not before a hand emerged, claw-like, jutting out from inside the elevator. I couldn't see who or what was inside, but as the doors attempted to close, they sensed the intruding limb and reopened with a disgruntled ding. This was no illusion. Whatever it was real and physical. The whole scene unfolded in half a heartbeat, and without thinking, I spun on my heel and bolted for the staircase. I leaped down to the first landing, racing down to the ground floor and sprinting for the revolving door in the lobby. I flew past the security sensors without sliding my card, the alarms blaring behind me as I shoved the heavy door open, squeezing through the gap and bursting into the parking lot. I didn't dare look back as I reached my car, throwing myself inside and escaping into the night. Tears streamed down my face as I peeled out of the lot, desperate to leave the horror behind. This morning at work felt disturbingly normal. No one mentioned the alarm. I finished my code reviews after a fitful sleep, but I was on edge. I told my manager I wouldn't work late again, trying to sound logical, though a part of me trembled with fear. She promised to let me know if late hours were unavoidable, but deep down, I knew I had a choice to make. If I had to work late again, alone, I would quit. There was no way I was returning to that darkness ever again.